Welcome to another little trip down road testing memory lane, and this time it is the 15th of November 2006 issue of MCN, where we got to ride Rossi's Camel Yamaha M1. We also got to ride the full set of 990s that year, including Hayden's RCV, which he won the championship on. Gibernau's Desmosedici, which was actually ridden by Bayliss that weekend. He was a stand-in and won the race, didn't he? And that was also the Desmosedici that the road bike Desmosedici RR was based on. We also rode Nakano's Kawasaki ZX-RR and Vermeulen's GSVR. So we rode the full set, and it was split between two issues of MCN. But before I go on, whilst looking through these MCNs, there's some absolutely corking stories in here from the world of racing, new bikes, features. I mean, 2006, the mid-noughties really for me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there, were kind of the, I don't know, some of the most exciting times, you know, in both racing, in all the championships, new bikes. Obviously it was more sporty bikes back then, not so much now. And there was a real kind of, you know, excitement in the air, I think, with motorcycles. And I was kind of riding the crest of a wave with road testing. I mean, you know, getting to ride MotoGP bikes is pretty special. But let's have a quick dive into a few of these stories before I go on about, and on about riding MotoGP bikes, which isn't as interesting as it might sound. But these stories actually fascinate me more. So in the 8th of November issue, the front page, the front cover, was all about the Ducati 1098. Now this is a bike that Ducati really needed to make, because I don't know if you remember, the 998 had finished at the end of 02, and the 999 replaced it, and it never really captured the imagination. Probably wasn't as pretty as the 916, didn't sell very well. A lot of Ducati dealers were struggling to sell bikes, and Ducati quickly realised they needed to produce a new model. So I actually got to speak to Claudio Domenicali, the boss of Ducati. He said that they did rush this bike out to save Ducati's skin. So it didn't take long to build. It was only like a 2 or 3 year gestation period. And it did save Ducati's skin. It was a great bike to ride. It looked fantastic. It was a return to the styling that everyone wanted. It was single-sided swing arm. It was the twin headlights, twin underseat pipes. It was a great bike. And for the first time, really, we pitched it against other 1000cc bikes in group tests. And although it never did that well, it was always a little bit clumsy, a little bit soft, a little bit finicky, but it was always fantastic to ride. It would never compete with an R1 or a Fireblade on track then, not like Panigales do now. But it was a fantastic bike. Also, the 1098R we rode 2008 was the first production bike to have proper traction control, so that was significant step forward. Then it obviously turned into the 1198. And I think I rode the last iteration of that, the 1198 Evo at Imola in 2011, before the Panigale came along. So that's really good to be reminded of that. MCN went really big on that for obvious reasons, because it was, you know, so much better than the 999, more powerful, 160 bhp, short stroke engine, just a work of art. Fantastic. And then other stories in the paper, also staying on Ducatis, we're talking about the Sport Classics. New Sport Classics. So this one was the Sport Classic Biposto and Sport 1000S. Now these were very simple, kind of retro styled air-cooled V-twins, and Ducati kind of pitched them as, because sports bikes were the be-all and end-all back then, they kind of pitched them kind of the older rider, which I think was a bit of a mistake, because it didn't really sell that well. And although it is an amazing bike, really light, really punchy, fantastic handling, the most unlikely wheelie machine you've ever ridden, it ceased production because it didn't sell many. But it was such bad timing because it was right on the eve of the retro scene absolutely exploding. And if they'd held their nerve and if they had marketed it at newer riders like they did the Scrambler when it came out, I think it would have been a success. But it's a shame Ducati don't make anything like this again. I mean, the Scrambler's good, but it's not an amazingly great bike to ride. Some of the sports story, you've got Haslam and Lavia staying at Airways Ducati. They were pretty dominant, weren't they? That's another race bike I rode. I remember Colin Wright telling me we rode the factory bike at Albacete, I think in the beginning of 2005. And he said to me, if I crash this bike, he said, you better just jump over the barriers and keep walking. You do not want to come back into the pits. So that obviously filled me with a lot of joy. And then the big story with MotoGP was the change from 990s to 800s. So there's a big selection of stories about all the riders riding their 800s for the first time. None of them really enjoyed riding them, and there was a lot of concerns over the safety. The 800s were released or produced in answer to the fact that the 990s were so fast down the straights and they were worried about safety. But they quickly realised that the irony was the 800s went through the corners quicker, so the crashes were faster. So, and as we all know, they went back to thousands again a few years later. So Rossi's worried. Who else is worried? Stoner's worried. But also interesting, they're seeing something I'd forgotten about. As part of the journalist tests, Toseland had a go on Danny Pedrosa's RCV and set some really fast lap times. But he only got 20 minutes at the end before it went dark. So poor old Toseland didn't have a lot of time to shine. He had levers made up and everything. But what a shame he didn't ride the RCV. I really like Toseland. His commentary in the WSB is absolutely fantastic. And then the other MCN issue, the one that Rossi's bike's in, had the 2007 R1 on the cover. So this was ridden by Trevor Franklin in Qatar, and was really impressed. And that bike went on to win MCN Group Test that year. It did really well in super stock trim. I had one as a long-term test bike which I raced, and yeah, that kind of took over from the GSXR 1000 K5 and K6 as being kind of the favourite 1000 of the time. 2008 it was the stubby nose Blade was our bike of the year, or sports bike of the year. Then it was the Big Bang R1 09, and then from 2010 for ages it was the S1000RR until the 2015 R1 came out. In actual fact, I was digging out some MCNs and found an S1000RR spy shot with R6 fairings, so maybe we'll talk about S1000RRs in some video, because that's something quite close to my heart, having raced them for over a decade now. And then the sports stories, you had Chianari, just talking, I mean, how cool was Chianari back in the day? I mean, not only did he dominate BSB for a while, there's that great footage of him on a Super Pole lap in the wet on his Handspray Honda at Donington. Just incredible. And his headline is, if I didn't race, I think I'd like to be a porn star. Wow. And my most favourite story in here is about Casey Stoner saying that he admits that leaving Honda for factory Ducati is a massive risk, but one he's willing to take. So these are the winter tests in 2006, and we all know what happened in 2007. He got on that Ducati and absolutely romped away at Qatar. Down the straight it looked like it was still 1000 when the others were on 800s, and went on to win the title. I mean, Stoner's an absolute legend. You can see a really great interview with him on Gypsy Tales podcast and video. He's such a great guy. So he's really misunderstood, I think. Just such a talent. Such a shame he's not out there racing now. And in this MCN, he looks so young. Right, let's get this thing fired up again. Right, so let's talk about Rossi's bike quickly. So it came sort of in the mid 2000s. We got the opportunity to ride a lot of factory race bikes, and I guess the history of that goes right the way back really to, I suppose, people like Alan Cathcart, who used to get exclusive rides on GP bikes, you know, through the 80s and 90s. He had a special relationship with a lot of the factories, and I guess it kind of snowballed from there. You know, I remember seeing the likes of Matt Oxley riding Grand Prix bikes as well in the 500 days, and just thinking, wow, what an experience that must be. And then sort of closer to when I joined, Mark Potter, the editor of MCN, used to do all the Grand Prix bikes, and you know, he would go to Suzuka and ride a 500 like Doohan's 500 and say Edwards's factory world superbike and a Suzuka bike. And then through the course of MCN, I was lucky enough to ride them as well. You know, the first proper race bike I rode was Carl Harris's HM Plant Honda 600 at Cadwell. And then in my sort of MCN career, I've ridden MotoGP bikes, 250 GP bikes, 500s, WSB, World Supersport, World Endurance, BSB, British Supersport, Superstock, TT. Just amazing. Doesn't happen so much now. A, because the manufacturers probably don't see the value in it like they used to. And especially the MotoGP thing became a bit of a free-for-all towards the end. There were sort of massive itineraries with all these people getting on the bikes and riding them. And maybe that got a bit too much for everybody. And also now the publications aren't as big on riding race bikes as they used to be. I don't think there's the same kind of appetite from the readers because, I don't know, it'd be nice to ride a new generation of MotoGP bike. The most recent one MCN's ridden is the Ducati, which Neil Hodgson rode a few years ago and was blown away by it. But, you know, I think the tyres are so specialised and the bikes are so specialised that it's a big risk letting the normal numpties get on one of their bikes and ride them. So, but back in 2006 it was different. My first MotoGP bike was 2005, riding Hayden's bike at Sepang, which was amazing. Then I got to ride the full set at Valencia 2006. We went to the races to watch the race, watched Rossi lose and Hayden win, which was really dramatic. And then there was a 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, riding all the bikes. So we had a full itinerary of riding the bikes. I'd actually woken up on Monday morning with the flu, so I couldn't believe my luck, but that was soon forgotten when I was riding the bikes. So riding Rossi's bike was obviously the highlight because of who Rossi is, and it was the height of his powers. You know, he moved to Yamaha in 2004 just to prove to everybody that he could win on something other than a Honda. And he had that maiden win, the battle with Biaggi in Welcome in South Africa, which was just amazing, when he just parked his bike up against the barrier and just sat there and either laughed or sobbed or whatever he did. And he won 9 races in 2004, 11 in 2005 and 5 in 2006, but he lost the title in 2006 and won in 2004 and 5. And it was strange when we got to ride the MotoGP bikes. The kind of setup was a lot like when we go to normal bike launches. So you're kind of met by all the PR people. Then you sit through a presentation. So some of the presentation talks about the mechanics of how the day's going to work. Some of it talks about the development and history of the bikes, which is absolutely fascinating. I've got a lot of the technical information about these bikes that you'd never know about. And you know, the Japanese manufacturers went to the same kind of detail as telling you what the bikes are like as they would do an R1 or whatever. So the M1 presentation talked about, you know, the frame thickness and the way the engine worked and all this kind of fascinating stuff. It was amazing. You know, you could fill a whole MCN with that kind of stuff. And it was weird because we were literally darting from presentation to presentation. So you'd ride one bike and then say thank you very much, give the bike back to the mechanic, and then you'd go to the presentation for the next one. So yeah, you were kind of, it was like literally being a kid in the sweet shop. It was just amazing. Obviously very nerve-wracking. Didn't want to crash, although a few journalists did actually crash the MotoGP bikes, which might be another reason why it doesn't happen now. I won't say who. The other cool thing about riding these MotoGP bikes is that you're on track with other journalists on other MotoGP bikes. Some are faster than you, and you're faster than some of them. So you're in this amazing situation where you're riding Rossi's bike or Hayden's bike, and you're catching a Rossi bike or a Hayden bike or a Nakano bike or whatever. And it's just like watching onboard lap on TV, except you're actually there, hearing it, sniffing it, being absolutely bedazzled by it. It's amazing. Most of the laps, most of the sessions were only 4 or 5 laps. So you get an out lap, 1 or 2 flyers, or maybe 2 or 3 flyers, and then in. And it, you know, you couldn't go any more than that because you'd muck up their schedule and probably be never invited to ride one of these bikes again. On the bikes with Michelin's, they were good to go straight away, but with the Bridgestone bikes, because it was an open tyre championship then, wasn't it? Because Valencia is a left-handed track, they felt really sketchy through the rights because the bikes don't go on the rights very often. And you see how much of a problem that is with MotoGP now. So probably lucky there wasn't more crashes. And on an anti-clockwise track, you forget about the right-hand side of the tyre because you're normally so used to turning right on a track. You kind of just take for granted the tyres are going to be there, but they're not. So you don't get too long on the bike. You know, you jump on these bikes and you just got to go. You don't want to be too slow because you don't want to show yourself up. You don't want to... You want to try and enjoy the bike because that's why you're there. You're not trying to assess it or give any technical feedback because you're just a passenger on the bike. It's just about enjoying the experience. And all the MotoGP bikes all had the character of the road superbikes of the time. So Hayden's RCV felt like a Blade. The ZX-RR felt like a ZX-10. The GSVR felt a little bit different because that was a V4 and the GSXR was an inline 4, but still had a similar character. The Ducati felt long and low like a 999, but really, really hot. I mean, you could barely hold on to the handlebars. After a few laps, the heat coming off the engine was just incredible. When we rode the 800 selection, Stoner's bike that I rode, which is a World Championship bike, revved to over 20,000 RPM. Just insane, and the heat coming off it was unbelievable. When they race it places like Sepang and, you know, humid countries, it must be unbearable. And of course Rossi's bike just felt like the best R1 ever. So because Rossi, even though he's small compared to normal humans, he's much taller than your average MotoGP rider. So unlike Nakano's bike or you know, the Suzuki's, it was quite roomy. So the seat had a lot of room back and front, so you weren't trapped in the seat. You could kind of enjoy it. The foot pegs weren't too high, the bars weren't too low. It was just a really nice, easy bike to ride. And of course, the best thing about riding a motorcycle is that it's just you and the bike. Once you're out on track, nobody can tell you what to do. Nobody can say, go, you're going too fast, going too slow. You're just out there enjoying it. For your 5 laps, it's just you and a MotoGP bike. And I'll still remember it to this day because it was just incredible. Just looking around the bike and you see, you know, all the Rossi logos, the, you know, the Doctor stickers and the little Ninja Turtle logos on the top yoke. You know, you're just looking around and thinking, I'm on Rossi's bike, you know, just absolutely incredible. And the other strange thing about riding bikes, those MotoGP bikes then, were the amount of electronics they had, which hadn't yet appeared on road bikes. So it had a lot of engine braking control, so a lot of freewheeling going into corners. So Rossi's bike felt more like a 2-stroke going into corners than any of the other bikes. Obviously, depends on how they were set up. You know, I don't know what kind of level of engine map we were given, whether we got the full fat or not. But having ridden a lot of factory bikes, the common thread is they are relatively easy to ride, because in the lower gears they're mapped so they don't give you too much power. So it's more prevention rather than cure. So with a road bike that's got a lot of power down low, you need a lot of electronics to hold it back. Whereas if you've got the technology and the engineers to set the mapping up from the get-go, you can have the bike making the perfect amount of power through each of the corners. And when you first jump on some of these bikes, they feel slow in the first few gears. But then as you go up through the gears, the kind of electronics kind of release and give you full power. Makes me laugh actually when I hear of people remapping their road going superbikes to have full power in the first few gears. You just can't use it. Even MotoGP riders can't use it, but I guess it sounds good when you're bragging online. So that was the thing that stood out with the electronics. The fact it didn't wheelie, because it had wheelie control. It had a cylinder cut, which not many, well, no road bikes have got it now. The only road bike that's got it is the S1000RR with twin throttle bodies, that if you fit the race kit, you can cut the cylinders into corners. So again, that's all about making the bike docile in the middle of the corner. Then it goes wild when it goes back onto 4 cylinders. And yeah, in the higher gears is where you feel all the power. So the bikes are only very light, 165 kilos ish, I think. When you think of super bikes on the road, are all about 200 kilos, so significantly lighter. And that's with full of fuel, and 240 bhp they reckon. So in 4th, 5th and 6th it just pulls like a road going superbike does in first. The other thing you notice, the carbon brakes, they don't work straight away. So the first sort of initial dab when you're coming out of the pits, it feels like you've got no brakes, but then you squeeze them again and you've got all the brakes in the world. The brakes work on kind of heat build up rather than actual full-on pressure. So that's why the MotoGP riders can brake with like one finger and just endo. So there's a lot to take in, all those electronics, the carbon brakes, you know, the fact you're on a very, very, very special bike and you don't want to crash it. And what else did Rossi's bike on it? It was Öhlins suspension, TTX technology, which of course is commonplace on road bikes now, on flashy road bikes with Öhlins. It had a counter-rotating crank, so when you accelerated, it keeps the front wheel down. When you back off, it keeps the back wheel down. And when you're in the middle of the corner, it pulls the front into the apex instead of pushing it wide. And of course now you've got that on road bikes. The Panigale's got it, and the MV-F3s have got it as well. So, you know, all this racing technology trickles down eventually. And Rossi's bike had a lot of problems that year. I think it was on its second frame to reduce chatter. Yeah, the memories of riding that bike, I think I said in my last video, you don't really enjoy it at the time. You feel really intimidated. You don't feel like you're worthy to be there. And you only really enjoy it after the event, when you think back and you get your pictures. I mean, you know, not only do you get to ride Rossi's bike, you have professional photographers taking pictures of you doing it, which is just you know, part of that dream, part of that road test idol dream that I had when I won the competition, all came to fruition. And I suppose if I was to have stopped then, I would have, you know, died a happy man. But luckily I get to carry on. Nothing like that nowadays. It's you know, the biking world's a lot different, isn't it? And I'm different. You know, sports bikes, I love sports bikes. I'm glad they exist. Probably don't enjoy riding them on the road as much as I used to. I enjoy, you know, doing other things on bikes now, but I'm still glad of their existence. And you know, they are dying. I think a lot of people are quite, you read, you know, what people say, they're almost gleefully kind of, you know, they're happy that sports bikes are gone, but I still love them. I think they look beautiful, and you know, riding that ultimate evolution of a sports bike, a MotoGP bike, is just amazing. So that was my little trip down memory lane with those two MCNs. I mean, searching through the archives, there's some amazing things. So maybe I'll pick out some kind of landmark bikes and just talk about what we said about them, what MC had said about them, you know, when they were first released, and you know, look back and also look forward and how they relate to today's bikes and what we think of them today. You know, if you've got any questions or comments, just, you know, stick them down below. Maybe I'll do another video just answering your questions. There's been quite a few already, so I probably will make another video. And we're getting towards the end of the year now, and I'm going to do a little road test roundup as well. So thanks very much for watching. I'm off on some launches now. Got 3 back-to-back bikes to ride next week. New Honda Hornet, new BMW M1000R and BMW S1000RR, all of which will be in MCN Online, Bike Magazine, Ride Magazine, and on MCN's YouTube channel. So that is it for now. Thanks very much for watching. I enjoyed looking back through the old papers, and yeah, I hope it's conjured up some good memories for you too.